The NFL regular season concluded with all 5 AFC playoff teams finishing with identical 11-5 records. A remarkable comeback in the Holiday Bowl was a highlight of the college football season, a rematch between Roberto Duran and Sugar Ray Leonard, a few gift ideas for sports fans, and much more in the November and December 1980 edition of Back in Time Sports. November kicked off with plenty of scoring in Week 9 of the NFL season, as every team put at least 10 points on the scoreboard. It wasn't pretty in Pittsburgh, but the Steelers snapped their 3-game losing streak with a 22-20 win over Green Bay. Green Bay racked up more yards from scrimmage than Pittsburgh, but 2 high snaps when punting led to 9 of the Steelers' points. Earl Campbell led the Oilers to a 20-16 win in Denver with 157 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. It was the 4th game in a row that Campbell has run for at least 150 yards. Vince Ferragamo led the Los Angeles Rams to victory with 5 touchdown passes, beating the still winless New Orleans Saints 45-31. Philadelphia escaped Seattle with a closely contested 27-20 win to retain the league's best record. The Eagles are now 8-1 with their only loss to St. Louis in Week 4. Speaking of the Cardinals, they had a lead over the Dallas Cowboys for all but the last 45 seconds of the second half. A 28-yard Danny White pass to Tony Hill clinched the victory for the Cowboys, who are trying to stay within reach of the Eagles. Speaking of the Cardinals again, since the New York Giants won their season opener against St. Louis, they have now lost 8 straight, with the latest coming to Tampa Bay by a score of 30-13. The Baltimore Colts appear to have worked on their pass protection after giving up a record 12 sacks last week. This week the protection was perfect, not allowing a single sack on quarterback Burt Jones, who led the team to a 31-24 win over Kansas City. The Chiefs may need to get some pointers from the Colts, however, as Kansas City quarterback Steve Fuller was sacked 10 times in the game. The Minnesota Vikings were 9-point underdogs at Washington, with quarterback Tommy Kramer unable to play due to an injured hand. But there was no need to worry, as the defense led the Vikings to an easy 39-14 win. The Vikings were 1 point away from scoring as many points as they had in their last 5 games combined. In the NFL's 10th week of the season, 6 quarterbacks threw for 300 yards and were still on the losing side of their games. Steve Grogan led the passing attacks that fell short, throwing for 374 yards in an exciting Monday night game at the Astrodome in Houston. Houston won the slugfest 38-34 with over 860 combined yards between the teams. And in a surprise to absolutely no one, Earl Campbell rushed for over 100 yards again with 130 and 2 touchdowns. Dan Fouts threw for 363 yards, and the Chargers rolled up 459 yards of offense, but somehow scored only 13 points in a loss to Denver. Doug Williams of Tampa Bay threw for 302 yards, which was over 3 times the total put up by Terry Bradshaw, but the Buccaneers came up 3 points short at the final whistle. Joe Theismann passed for 305 yards, with 124 going to rookie Art Monk, but after being down 35-0 at halftime to the Bears, Washington did not have enough time to complete the comeback and lost 35-21. St. Louis quarterback Jim Hart threw for 344 yards, but unfortunately for the Cardinals, his counterpart Steve Bartkowski threw for 378, and the Falcons won the game in overtime. Saints quarterback Archie Manning threw for 306 yards, but was outdueled by Ron Jaworski, who threw for 323 yards in denying New Orleans their first win. There was an upset in the NFC East as the Giants snapped their 8-game losing streak with a win over Dallas. Phil Simms had 351 yards passing and 3 touchdowns, but it still took a field goal with a minute left to clinch the 38-35 win. Dallas gave the Giants little help with 4 first-half interceptions, spoiling a brilliant 183-yard rushing day for Tony Dorsett. The Miami Dolphins were 11-point underdogs at Los Angeles, with starting quarterback Bob Greasy out with an injury. Miami not only won, but cruised to a 35-14 win, with backup David Woodley throwing for 161 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and also running 9 times for 51 yards and 2 more touchdowns. Week 11 brought back a return of the defenses, with less than half the teams reaching 20 points. An anomaly of the low-scoring week was the Minnesota Vikings beating Tampa Bay 38-30. Over 1,000 total yards were accumulated, with 92 passes thrown in the game. Buccaneers quarterback Doug Williams had a brilliant game, throwing for 486 yards and 4 touchdowns in the losing effort. The Houston Oilers won a low-scoring battle with the Chicago Bears 10-6, but if the Oilers are playing, Earl Campbell is running, and in this game he ran for 206 yards. Another day, another career high. But the only touchdown of the game came on a fake field goal by Houston just before halftime. Los Angeles got a big road win in Foxborough, Massachusetts, defeating New England thanks to a 1-yard run by Elvis Peacock late in the third quarter. The Rams stayed within 1 game of the Falcons in the NFC West. New England dropped to second place in the AFC East with a loss, combined with a Buffalo shutout of Cincinnati. Dallas stayed within 2 games of Philadelphia in the NFC East with a 31-21 win over St. Louis. The Cowboys scored the last 21 points in the game with touchdown passes from Danny White to Drew Pearson and Tony Hill, and an 11-yard rushing touchdown by Tony Dorsett. Drew Pearson became the Cowboys' all-time leader in receptions with his 366th catch. The Raiders continued their domination of Monday night with a comeback win against Seattle. Oakland is now 15-1-1 on Mondays and are also in sole possession of first place in the AFC West, a game ahead of San Diego. Week 12 kicked off with an exciting Thursday night game between San Diego and Miami in the Orange Bowl. It was a back-and-forth game as the Dolphins held the lead twice, the Chargers 4 times, and 3 times it was tied, including at the end of regulation. In overtime, the Chargers intercepted a pass in Dolphins territory and converted a field goal to win the game 27-24. The other overtime game of the week included a furious comeback by the Oilers, who scored 28 fourth-quarter points. The Jets were able to keep Earl Campbell in check and put a 21-point lead on the scoreboard by halftime to force Houston to turn to the passing game. Oilers quarterback Ken Stabler finally got the pass attack in high gear with 4 touchdown passes in the fourth quarter to tie the game. New York missed a game-winning field goal in the last seconds of regulation, but converted a kick in overtime to get the win. With the Oilers' loss, Cleveland had a chance to pull even with Houston for the AFC Central lead and did just that with an easy 31-7 victory over the Bengals. Browns quarterback Brian Sipe, who is the AFC's top-rated passer, threw for 310 yards and 4 touchdowns in the win. New England also cruised to easy victory thanks to some gifts from Baltimore. The Colts fumbled 2 kickoffs, which were both returned for touchdowns. Something had to give as Oakland took their 6-game winning streak to Veterans Stadium and faced the Eagles, who were riding a 7-game winning streak of their own. What gave were the offenses, as neither team scored in the first half, and the teams combined for 17 punts in the game. In the fourth quarter, Raiders quarterback Jim Plunkett hit Cliff Branch on an 86-yard touchdown pass to take the lead. Philadelphia kept going to running back Wilbert Montgomery, and it paid off with a 3-yard touchdown to cap off an Eagles victory. Week 13 started with the 2 traditional Thanksgiving Day games, one going to overtime and the other a yawner. Detroit hosted the first game, which turned into a duel between Walter Payton and Billy Sims. Payton outgained Sims by 2 yards, with no turnovers in the game by either team and almost identical stat lines. But it only took 1 play in overtime to end the game. Bears return specialist Dave Williams scored on a 95-yard kick return. Payton's rushing yards gave him 1,122 for the season, and he became only the 4th running back in NFL history to go over 1,000 yards in 5 consecutive seasons. It was time for a Turkey Day nap early in the second game, with Dallas blowing out Seattle 51-7. 7 was the lucky number for the Cowboys. It was the number of Seattle turnovers as well as the number of Dallas touchdowns. Cleveland traveled to the Astrodome to take on the Oilers in a matchup of the 2 teams tied for first place in the AFC Central. The Oilers held the Browns to less than 200 total yards in the game, but Cleveland scored first and never relinquished the lead in a 17-14 win. If not for the stingy Oiler defense, the game could have gotten out of hand early. Cleveland had first quarter drives starting on Houston's 18, 47, 33, and 26-yard lines. San Diego hosted the high-flying Eagles and held on by the slimmest of margins, despite outgaining Philadelphia by 140 yards. Things seemed in hand at halftime, with the Chargers leading 19-0, but San Diego only managed a field goal in the second half, which was just enough to claim the 22-21 win. New England quarterback Steve Grogan completed 16 passes to his teammates and 6 to the 49ers, as San Francisco's defense led the 49ers to a 21-17 win. 49ers quarterback Joe Montana threw for 3 touchdowns, but left the game with a thigh bruise after being sacked in the third quarter. The fight for playoff spots really heated up in Week 14, with 10 games being decided by a touchdown or less. It also included the biggest blowout of the season, with Chicago dominating every aspect of their game against Green Bay. Well, Chicago did miss 2 extra points on their 9 touchdowns, but otherwise played a nearly perfect game. Quarterback Vince Evans completed 18 of 22 passes for 316 yards and 3 touchdowns, and Walter Payton ran for 130 yards and 3 touchdowns, as the Bears put up 594 yards in total offense in the 61-7 win. In a big AFC Central matchup, Houston hosted Pittsburgh and welcomed their guests with some stellar defense. The Oilers forced 5 turnovers, shutting out the Steelers 6-0. 2 9-4 teams met in Buffalo in another defensive struggle, with the Bills holding the Rams to 61 passing yards, but needed overtime to win 10-7. Atlanta has quietly taken the NFL by storm, winning their 8th straight game, converting a field goal with 3 seconds left in Philadelphia. The Falcons simply outplayed the Eagles, shutting down Philadelphia's run game. The 0-13 New Orleans Saints were feeling really good about finally getting their first win of the season, leading the 49ers 35-7 at halftime in San Francisco. But San Francisco wasn't ready to pack it in. Joe Montana ran for a touchdown and threw a 71-yard pass to Dwight Clark to cut it to a 14-point lead going into the fourth quarter. The 49ers got 2 more touchdowns in the fourth quarter to send the game to overtime. 8 minutes into overtime, San Francisco kicked a field goal to keep the Saints winless. Washington broke a 5-game losing streak thanks to Joe Lavender, who intercepted 3 of Dan Fouts' passes, returning 1 for a touchdown. The San Diego Chargers turned the ball over 7 times and lost by a score of 40-17. Battles heated up in the AFC West and NFC East in Week 15. In the AFC West, San Diego and Oakland entered the week tied for the lead. San Diego hosted the Seahawks and controlled the game throughout despite 4 turnovers with a 21-14 win. Oakland had a tougher battle with Denver, giving up 448 passing yards to the Broncos, but managed to hold on to win 24-21. The AFC West winner will be decided in Week 16. In the NFC East, Philadelphia smothered the Cardinals, giving up only 126 total yards in a 17-3 win. The Dallas Cowboys defense didn't perform as well, giving up 517 total yards to the Rams in a 38-14 loss. The Eagles moved a game ahead of the Cowboys, but have not clinched the division yet. In the AFC Central, Houston got a big win over Green Bay on the frozen tundra of Lambeau Field 22-3. The temperature was 19 degrees with a 14-mile-an-hour wind, but it didn't slow down Earl Campbell, who rushed for 181 yards and 2 touchdowns. The Oilers got some help from Minnesota as the Vikings scored 21 fourth-quarter points to beat Cleveland 28-23. Tommy Kramer threw for 456 yards and 4 touchdowns, with 142 of those yards and 2 touchdowns going to Ahmad Rashad. The loss drops the Browns into a tie with Houston, but it also clinched the NFC Central for the Vikings. The Atlanta Falcons clinched the NFC West, snapping the Los Angeles Rams' streak of 7 consecutive division titles by beating the 49ers 35-10. In the AFC East, New England needed a win over Buffalo to keep their hopes alive of catching the Bills, and they did just that. In a game that had only 251 total passing yards, the Patriots were more successful in every phase of the game and won comfortably 24-2. Going into Week 16, the 5 playoff teams in the NFC were set, with the only question being whether Dallas or Philadelphia would win the East Division. The AFC, however, was up for grabs with all 3 divisions on the line, and 7 teams competing for 5 playoff spots. In the NFC East, because of tiebreakers, Dallas had to beat Philadelphia by more than 25 points to win the division. It was a tall order, but at halftime it looked more than possible, with the Cowboys leading 21-0. And after a Cowboys score early in the fourth quarter, they were up 35-10. But the Eagles wouldn't concede and scored the last 17 points to clinch the division title with only an 8-point loss. In the AFC East, all Buffalo had to do was beat San Francisco to win the division, and they delivered with a hard-fought 18-13 win. It was the Bills' first division championship since 1966. New England needed to beat New Orleans and then have either Cleveland or San Diego lose to claim a wild card. The Patriots did their job, but the Chargers and Browns didn't comply, which left New England out of the playoffs. San Diego and Cleveland clinched division titles with those wins. Oakland and Houston both needed wins to claim wild card berths, and both delivered, with the Raiders winning 33-17 over the Giants and the Oilers winning 20-16. In the Oilers win, Earl Campbell set an NFL record running for over 200 yards in 4 games this season, and also won his 3rd consecutive NFL rushing title. With the NFL playoff picture set, the wildcard games got underway on December 28th, with Houston going on the road to face Oakland and Dallas hosting last year's NFC champion Los Angeles. The NFC game was up first in a rematch of the Monday night game 2 weeks ago, which the Rams won 38-14. Dallas was looking for revenge, but at halftime the game was tied at 13. The second half was all Dallas as the Cowboys went to the ground game to move the ball, and Danny White converted the drives with 3 touchdown passes to win 34-13. Tony Dorsett set the Cowboys' playoff rushing record with 160 yards and was part of the 338 team rushing yards that set a club record for the regular season or playoffs. Dallas will travel to Atlanta to face the Falcons next week. In the AFC wildcard game, Oiler quarterback Ken Stabler was attempting to lead Houston to a victory over his former team. He didn't get a warm welcome in Oakland, however, being sacked 7 times. The Raiders also held Earl Campbell under 100 yards and took control in the fourth quarter to win 27-7. Raiders quarterback Jim Plunkett only completed 8 of 23 passes, but averaged over 20 yards on each completion, and 2 of them went for touchdowns. Lester Hayes had a 20-yard interception return for a touchdown to put the game out of reach. Oakland will face another AFC Central team next week, facing the Browns in Cleveland. Week 9 of the college football season was full of turmoil as 7 of the top 20 teams in the country suffered a loss, and it was the first loss for 4 of those teams. Number 1 Alabama's 28-game winning streak was snapped by Mississippi State when the Bulldogs' inspired defense held Alabama to 180 total yards in a 6-3 win. Alabama drove to the Bulldogs' 3-yard line with 6 seconds left, but on the next play Mississippi State forced and recovered a fumble to secure the win. Number 2 UCLA was also stunned on the road against Arizona. Defense came through in this game as well when the Wildcats sacked the UCLA quarterback for a safety with 1.5 minutes left in the game. Arizona played the field position game well with several punts more than 50 yards and one for 80 yards. Number 16 Oklahoma pounded number 6 North Carolina 41-7 without a single passing yard by the Sooners. North Carolina came into the game third in the nation against the run, allowing only 538 yards all year, but allowed 495 in this game. Oklahoma quarterback J.C. Watt scored 3 touchdowns and led the devastating wishbone attack against the Tar Heels. Number 12 Texas lost to Texas Tech 24-20, the Longhorns' second loss of the season. The game was essentially over at halftime with no points scored in the second half. Number 4 Georgia ran to a 13-10 win over number 14 South Carolina, but it took some effort. Freshman Herschel Walker ran for 219 yards on a school record 43 carries. Handoffs to Walker accounted for over 2/3 of Georgia's offensive plays. Walker became the 13th freshman in NCAA history to rush for 1,000 yards in a season. In the loss, George Rogers of South Carolina rushed for 168 yards on 35 carries in the much-anticipated matchup between the two running backs. The 10th-ranked Baylor Bears were upset by San Jose State 30-22 in Waco. It was San Jose State's second attempt this year to beat a ranked team. The first was in early October when head coach Jack Elway lost to number 15 Stanford, a team that happens to be quarterbacked by his son. But this was a good day for the entire Elway family. John Elway set several conference records in Stanford's 54-13 victory over winless Oregon State. Elway set the records for touchdowns thrown with 6, 4 of those coming in the first quarter, and the most touchdowns in a season with 25. Cardinal receiver Ken Marjoram also set a conference record, catching 4 touchdowns in the game. John Elway wasn't the only quarterback that threw for 6 touchdowns this week. Number 17 BYU quarterback Jim McMahon threw for 451 yards and 6 touchdowns in an 83-7 blowout of UTEP. McMahon has 31 touchdown passes this year and is within sight of the NCAA single-season record of 39. All 6 touchdown throws and 372 of McMahon's yards came in the first half, both of which set NCAA records for a half. Even more remarkable, McMahon was out of the game for 2 BYU possessions in the first quarter. After the top 2 teams in the rankings lost last week, Notre Dame entered Week 10 as the number 1 team in the country. It is likely there will be another number 1 next week as Notre Dame played Georgia Tech to a 3-3 tie. It was a stunning result, with Georgia Tech coming into the game with a 1-7 record. The Irish may have been caught looking ahead to next week's game with number 6 Alabama, who had no trouble beating LSU this week 28-7. Number 2 Georgia faced Florida in Jacksonville in a hard-fought game. After getting out to a 20-10 lead behind 238 rushing yards by Herschel Walker, Florida scored 11 fourth-quarter points to take the lead. Georgia got the ball on their own 7-yard line with 1.5 minutes left in the game. The Bulldogs didn't take long to strike, throwing a short pass that was taken 93 yards to the end zone for a 26-21 victory. Number 8 UCLA, who lost running back Freeman McNeil to injury in the first quarter, dropped a close game at home to Oregon 20-14. Number 7 Ohio State survived a shootout with Illinois 49-42. Illini quarterback Dave Wilson broke the major college passing record, throwing for 621 yards, completing 43 of 69 attempts. The previous record was 571 yards by Mark Wilson of BYU in 1977. Other top 20 teams that survived close games included number 11 Oklahoma defeating Kansas 21-19 and number 14 North Carolina beating Clemson 24-19. Heading into the college football season's last full weekend of games, Georgia was the new number 1 team and went on the road to face preseason number 19 Auburn. The Tigers were a disappointing 5-4 on the season, but a win over the top-ranked Bulldogs would be a great boon for the program, not to mention their first conference win this season. Georgia got out to a 17-7 lead at halftime, but weren't satisfied, converting a successful onside kick to start the second half. Auburn put up a good fight, but fell short to the Bulldogs 31-21. Number 2 USC hosted Washington, who was also undefeated in conference play. The Huskies intercepted 4 passes and recovered 4 fumbles to beat the Trojans 20-10. USC trailed in a football game for the first time all season when Washington got out to a 3-0 lead early in the game. In a top matchup, number 5 Alabama hosted number 6 Notre Dame, and despite Tide coach Bear Bryant's 304 wins, he was 0-3 against Notre Dame. After Saturday, he was now 0-4 as the Irish beat Alabama 7-0 with a defensive masterpiece. Number 11 Michigan hosted number 16 Purdue in front of 105,000 fans and didn't disappoint. After 2 non-conference losses early in the season, the Wolverines have gone undefeated in Big Ten play and shut out the Boilermakers 26-0. Anthony Carter caught 2 touchdown passes, and Michigan employed 6 defensive backs to stop Purdue's passing attack to set up a Big Ten showdown with Ohio State next week. After the games, many bowl game invitations were extended. The Garden State Bowl has a matchup between Houston and Navy. SMU accepted an invitation to the Holiday Bowl. The Tangerine Bowl will feature Maryland versus Florida. The Fiesta Bowl pits Penn State against either Ohio State or Michigan. The Sun Bowl secured Mississippi State against a Big 8 opponent. The Liberty Bowl has Purdue versus Missouri. The Gator Bowl features a matchup between South Carolina and Pittsburgh. The Bluebonnet Bowl is set for North Carolina against Texas. In the New Year's Day games, the Sugar Bowl has a Georgia and Notre Dame matchup. The Cotton Bowl hosts Baylor and Alabama. The Rose Bowl will have Washington facing either Michigan or Ohio State, and the Orange Bowl will showcase Florida State against either Nebraska or Oklahoma. Rivalry week in college football kicked off with 4 matchups between ranked teams. Number 9 Oklahoma traveled to Lincoln to take on number 4 Nebraska. The Sooners had won 8 of their last 9 meetings with the Cornhuskers, with neither team ranked lower than number 11 in any of those matchups. Nebraska got out to 10-0 and 17-14 leads, but with 3 minutes left on the clock in the fourth quarter, the Sooners drove 80 yards and Buster Rhymes ran for the game-winning touchdown with less than a minute left. With the win, the Sooners clinched at least a tie for the Big 8 conference crown, but must beat Oklahoma State next week to get an invite to the Orange Bowl. Number 10 Michigan was also on the road to play number 5 Ohio State. In the last 11 games of the rivalry, both teams have won 5 games with 1 tie, and neither team has scored more than 24 points. This game continued the defensive trend with only 1 touchdown scored in the game, a 13-yard touchdown catch by Anthony Carter to give Michigan a 9-3 win. With the win, the Wolverines clinched a spot in the Rose Bowl to play Washington on New Year's Day. Number 11 Baylor hosted number 20 Texas and had revenge on their minds. Last year, the Longhorns held Baylor to just 2 first downs in a 13-0 shutout. The Bears turned the table this year and held Texas scoreless in a 16-0 win, holding the Longhorns to just 35 yards rushing on 40 carries. Backup quarterback Jay Schroeder connected on a 58-yard pass to Freeman McNeil with 2 minutes remaining to lift number 18 UCLA to a 20-17 victory over number 12 USC. It was Bruin coach Terry Donahue's first win over the Trojans in his 5th attempt. Number 2 Notre Dame, who was one of only 2 undefeated teams coming into this week's games, got off to a slow start but eventually cruised to a 24-10 win over Air Force. Number 13 BYU won their 5th straight WAC conference title with a 56-6 win over Utah. BYU quarterback Jim McMahon set a major college record with 42 touchdown passes on the season. He also became the first player to pass for more than 4,000 yards in a season. In the battle for the Golden Egg, number 17 Mississippi State beat Mississippi 19-14. And the Big Apple Trophy went to number 16 Washington after beating in-state rival Washington State 30-23. There were 8 ranked teams in action on the weekend after Thanksgiving, starting with a huge matchup on Friday between number 4 Pittsburgh and number 5 Penn State. The Panthers won a defensive struggle 14-9 and for the first time in 31 years beat the Nittany Lions in back-to-back years. Penn State still holds the all-time lead in the series, 39-38 with 3 ties. Number 1 ranked Georgia rolled to their first perfect regular season in 34 years, beating Georgia Tech 38-20. Freshman Herschel Walker ran for 205 yards and 3 touchdowns, giving him 1,616 yards on the season, which broke the freshman record of 1,586 by Tony Dorsett of Pittsburgh in 1973. Number 6 Oklahoma had no trouble earning an Orange Bowl berth, beating Oklahoma State 63-14. Number 9 Alabama beat rival Auburn 34-18, pulling away after halftime. Miami cruised past number 18 Florida 31-7, with quarterback Jim Kelly throwing 2 touchdowns for the Hurricanes. Number 14 UCLA routed Oregon State 34-3 in the 4th annual Mirage Bowl in Tokyo, Japan. Freeman McNeil ran for 3 first-half touchdowns and surpassed the all-time Bruin rushing record of 3,181 set by Wendell Tyler, who now plays for the Los Angeles Rams. The last 2 games before bowl season got underway took place on December 6th and both featured ranked teams. Number 2 Notre Dame took an undefeated record of 9-0-1 to Los Angeles to face number 17 Southern California and with a win would almost certainly ensure a matchup for the national championship in the Sugar Bowl against Georgia. In a battle of top 10 defenses, USC got out to a 10-0 lead at halftime. In the third quarter, Notre Dame had a first down inside the Trojans' 10-yard line on 2 possessions, but came away with only 3 points. The Trojans ended any hope of a national championship for the Irish with a 20-3 win. Notre Dame's loss opened the door for number 3 Florida State, who are hosting Florida in the other day's game. At halftime, it looked like the Seminoles were not going to walk through that door, trailing 13-3 to the Gators. Coach Bobby Bowden must have had an inspiring halftime speech as Florida State took over the game in the second half and won the game 17-13 in front of a record crowd at Doak Campbell Stadium. Despite the loss, Florida posted a remarkable turnaround, ending the regular season 7-4 after going winless last year. The Gators' offense more than doubled their points scored on the season, from 106 last year to 221 this year under new offensive coordinator Mike Shanahan. There were 15 bowl games on the schedule this year, with 10 taking place in December. First up was the Independence Bowl, with Southern Mississippi pulling out a last-minute win against McNeese State, 16-14. The Garden State Bowl was next, with Houston shutting out Navy 35-0 at Giants Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey. In the third edition of the Holiday Bowl, BYU is making its third appearance, but still looking for its first win. Last year, BYU came into the game undefeated at 11-0 and ranked 9th in the country, but lost to Indiana 38-37. In this year's matchup, BYU came in ranked number 14 at 11-1, facing number 19 SMU. It was an air versus ground game, with BYU leading the nation with 409 passing yards per game, and run-heavy SMU riding the Pony Express of running backs Eric Dickerson and Craig James. Just like last year's Holiday Bowl, each team scored in every quarter, but it was SMU running in front 45-25 with 4 minutes left in the game. BYU fans began leaving the stadium, but the team had not given up. On the next possession, Jim McMahon threw a quick touchdown pass, and then BYU recovered an onside kick. Another quick score cut the lead to 45-39. BYU then forced the Mustangs to punt with 13 seconds left, which was promptly blocked, and BYU took over at SMU's 41-yard line. 2 incomplete passes left BYU with just enough time for a Hail Mary. The prayer was answered as tight end Clay Brown pulled down the pass in the end zone to tie the game. The extra point gave BYU the win and perhaps the greatest comeback in college football history. The Cougars scored 21 points in the last 2 minutes and 33 seconds of the game. McMahon, who threw for 250 yards in the last 12 minutes, shared MVP honors with the Mustangs' Craig James, who totaled 225 rushing yards in the game. It was BYU's first ever bowl win and surely one they will never forget. In the Tangerine Bowl, receiver Chris Collinsworth had 166 receiving yards and caught 2 touchdown passes as Florida beat Maryland. The day after Christmas, number 10 Penn State faced off against number 11 Ohio State in the Fiesta Bowl. The Buckeyes jumped out to a 19-10 lead at halftime, but the Nittany Lions roared back for 21 unanswered second-half points. Offensive MVP Kurt Warner ran for 156 yards on only 18 carries. In the first of 3 bowl games on the last Saturday in December, Arkansas beat Tulane 34-15 in the Hall of Fame Classic. In the Sun Bowl, number 8 Nebraska faced number 17 Mississippi State, and the Cornhuskers won comfortably 31-17 in El Paso. In the Liberty Bowl, Purdue held off a late rally by Missouri to win 28-25. Number 3 Pittsburgh kept its national title hopes alive by defeating South Carolina in the Gator Bowl with a dominating 37-9 victory. Pitt lost to number 2 Florida State in its only loss this season, and will now need losses from both the Seminoles and Georgia for a chance to claim the title. On New Year's Eve, number 13 North Carolina traveled to Houston to face Texas in the Bluebonnet Bowl. In the 22-year history of the bowl, the Tar Heels were the first that did not commit a turnover, and with a good defensive effort, defeated the Longhorns 16-7. Several NBA milestones were passed in December, with 6-time MVP Kareem Abdul-Jabbar passing the 25,000-point mark. Abdul-Jabbar is the 5th player to reach 25,000 points, joining Wilt Chamberlain, Oscar Robertson, John Havlicek, and Jerry West. Elvin Hayes became the 4th highest rebounder in league history with 14,242, passing Walt Bellamy. As an NBA Ironman, in his 13-year career, Hayes has only missed 6 games. Dave Winfield became the highest-paid free agent in Major League Baseball history, signing a contract with the New York Yankees for a reported $15 million over 10 years. The contract is believed to be tied to the cost of living index and could exceed $1.5 million annually. The 68th Grey Cup in the Canadian Football League took place at Exhibition Stadium in Toronto. It was the Hamilton Tiger Cats' first Grey Cup since they won their 6th championship 8 years ago. The Edmonton Eskimos have won the last 2 cups and also have 6 total championships. Edmonton easily won their 3rd consecutive Grey Cup by a score of 48-10, with quarterback Warren Moon named the game's MVP after throwing for 398 yards and 3 touchdowns. It was the largest margin of victory in the 68 years of the championship game. Sugar Ray Leonard won the WBC welterweight title back from Roberto Duran in a rematch of their June fight, but not in the way he expected. His strategy of jabbing and counterpunching instead of getting into a slugfest with the powerful Duran was working, but it was still a close match in the 8th round when Duran suddenly quit the fight. Duran said he had worsening stomach cramps after the 5th round, which were weakening his arms and legs. A fight with WBA welterweight champion Tommy Hearns to unify the belts may be in Leonard's future. If there are sports fans on your Christmas shopping list, you're in luck. There is a wide range of gifts this year. For those on a budget shopping for NFL fans, you could consider a few mini helmets from gumball machines found in many grocery stores, or a set of pencils from Faber-Castell. Mugs, pennants, or even wastebaskets are also options. The always popular Nerf products have a ball for a wide range of sports. A Spalding Magic Johnson basketball of official size and weight can also be had for less than $10. If your budget is a little more robust, the handheld Mattel electronic sports games are sold for $15 to $25. Mattel has basketball, baseball, soccer, and football games, as well as an updated version of their popular football game called Football 2, for 2 players, which includes a scoreboard and options to pass, kick field goals, or punt. Coleco also has an alternative football game called Electronic Quarterback. For a racing game, check out Digital Derby by Tomy. If you have a few extra disposable dollars, video games can be upgraded from a handheld device to a television screen for $139 to $189. The 3 best-selling consoles on the market are Atari's video game system, Mattel's Intellivision, and the Magnavox Odyssey. Atari is the best for variety as it has the most games per cartridge and the most cartridges available. The Odyssey is the best for screen quality and complex play, but has fewer cartridges available. The Intellivision, which debuted last year, has the best combination of both play quality and sports choices. However, it is a 2-player game, while Atari is known for solitary playability. If your Christmas bonus was especially generous this year, a VCR machine will allow a sports fan to record all of their favorite sports games to be watched, paused, and rewinded as many times as desired. Broadcasts can also be recorded automatically with the help of a digital timer. A big screen projection television is the ultimate in watching your favorite sporting events in the comfort of your home. As a bonus, there are special offers that include one of the most popular video game consoles for free. If Santa is a sports fan, some of these items may be under the tree this year. That's all for November and December 1980. Looking ahead to the next episode, Super Bowl 15 will conclude the NFL season in New Orleans. The top 2 college football teams will play in New Year's Day bowl games, although not against each other. Updates on the NBA and college basketball seasons, and much more on the January 1981 edition of Back in Time Sports.